My name is Don Lee, Talkeetna, Alaska. I'm an ATP multi-engine land and sea, CFII, MEI. I've flown in South America, Australia, Europe, and most of my time, of course, has been spent in Alaska in support of expedition air support for climbers in the Alaska Range, where I train applicants to get their seaplane rating and offer a first course teaching off airport landings, mountain tops, gravel bars, and river landings. I also do ski operations, teach people how to land on glaciers up to 12,000 feet. It was March 8th of 2005. I was working for Fly Denali, air service that does primarily scenic flights around Mount McKinley. I was scheduled to fly the de Havilland DH-2 Beaver. It's a 450 horsepower, 5,200 pound gross weight aircraft, single engine. We do 3 different flights. We do an abbreviated flight where we just kind of go in and out real quick into the Ruth Amphitheater. We have a half wrap, which goes halfway around the mountain, but these folks had scheduled the grand tour completely around the mountain with a glacier landing and back. It was a nice clear day, the weather was good, and I had prepared the airplane, so we were good to go after passenger briefing. There's a little bit of weather in the amphitheater. There's a little bit of low-level clouds in the closest part of the mountain, so I skirted around that lower layer of clouds and proceeded to circumvent the mountain, climbing to about 11,000 feet. And just off the Pioneer Ridge in the Wickersham Wall on the north side, it was a nice, beautiful, clear day. There was a few little streets of turbulence. It's kind of just a rhythmic turbulence. And as I was reaching about 11,000 feet, throttling back, that Hamilton Standard, it's a 2-blade propeller, that big, wide Hamilton Standard, started to, that's when I just started to get the first indication that there was going to be, that something was up. The wings started to hunt very gradually. Just as quick as I was going, what's that? The airplane just went completely out of control. The wings started to flap extremely violently, kind of a bump, 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 bump. The wingtips were disappearing out of sight off the end of the lift struts. The yoke was moving back and forth, right and left. The rudder pedals were going stop to stop as fast as they possibly could, like a sewing machine. It just, and the whole dashboard was to blur because it was incredibly violent. Strength, there's no way I could even hold it, and so the only controls I had left was the throttle and the mixture and the prop. So I jerked all those back, put both arms around the yoke, and started to pull back on it to try and get the airplane where it was absolutely slow as possible. And this was all over with in like less than 5 seconds. It was like, hey, what's that wiggle? My passengers were scared speechless. They were just looking around. I got on the radio and said, Mayday, 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 it's coming apart, it's coming apart. I did my Mayday call a couple times. I didn't hear any response. I'm about as far away as we go. We're on the north side of the Alaska Range, over the most desolate part. The outside air temperature was probably about 25 below zero, and the temperature on the ground was probably 10 or 15 below. So now I'm at 11,000 feet coasting. I thought maybe I'd just spiral down and land on one of the glaciers. So I was thinking, well, if I'm gliding, I might as well glide back towards Talkeetna. At 11,000 feet, you get a pretty good glide ratio, especially with that Beaver. And so I started heading towards Anderson Pass. I could see the damage on the wings even from the cockpit. I could see the propeller had 2 blades on it, so it didn't shed a blade. So I fired that big old round motor back up again. But as I was starting to get back to cruise speed, I could feel that little bit of a hunt again, and I immediately throttled back to about 18 inches of manifold pressure, just barely enough to keep it flying. I was able to keep altitude. So at that point, I figured, well, at least try to make it to the highway. It's about 30 miles away. Of course, try to reassure the people all the time, going, well, things happen. I think everything's okay. We're going to make it. And I didn't know myself whether I was going to make it or not. I felt like I was going to cry. I got it back over the highway. Everything seems to be fairly stable at this point. It's still flying, so I just kept flying and eventually did make it back to Talkeetna and unloaded my passengers. And I looked back over my shoulder over the top of the wings. My heart just sank. I was like, oh, my God. You could see wrinkles 2 inches deep on top of the wings where they had bent. They figured it was going 4 to 5 feet fluctuations in the wing. So extreme and so violent that it actually cracked the wing spar in between the empennage and the lift strut. And I've gotten myself in situations over the years, but this is the first time an airplane has actually tried to come apart around me and shed all the fairings on the wings. Of course, the wings were damaged beyond control. It warped it's called the bird cage that holds the engine. It warped the tail. Everything. The whole airplane was destroyed. Very, very few people survive flutter in an aircraft because it's so self-destructive. It feeds on itself. The mechanic that was taking the plane apart would call me every once in a while and say, oh my God, you should see this wing spar. I want to take you to Las Vegas. You're the luckiest guy in the world. The wing spar on a de Havilland Beaver is about a 1.5 feet deep. It's a big I-beam wing spar, and it was actually cracked 2/3 across. One of the 2 bolts that bolt the wing onto the fuselage, the rear attach point was completely severed. Literally held on just by lift from the wing, and if that had let go, the wing would just spin. That would have been it. One aileron was 17 ounces out of balance, and a linkage on an aileron ball joint in the housing was a little bit loose. One of the rear attach points on the wing could have been about 3/1000 of a wobble, an elongated hole in that back wing. Thin that out to 20 feet, 25-foot wing. 3/1000 of an inch all of a sudden is 2 inches. So it does make a difference. By climbing, I was able to slow down the airspeed, which was accentuating this problem, and by putting a load on the airplane, was able to put enough pressure on the wings to stop them from flapping so hard. As captain of the airplane, you always try to reassure your passengers that everything's going to be okay. They are terrified. They're saying, what was that? I was about as confused as they were. And I'm going, well, I'm not exactly sure what that was, but everything's going to be okay. Just relax. We're going to head back now, and I'm sorry for this little interruption on your scenic flight. Try and alleviate any unnecessary fear or worry that they had. There was tremendous hope because the airplane was still flying. I had skis underneath it. I had an engine that was running. You never want to give up flying the airplane. You fly it right to the last second, right to the ground. If something goes wrong, if it stabilizes itself, don't mess with it anymore. Just keep your airplane in the same configuration. I would have had to circle 11,000 feet to land in an incredibly remote area. I think that decision to continue towards Talkeetna was wise. Once I made the highway, the decision to continue to Talkeetna with a damaged airplane was maybe pushing my luck. If something was flapping or rattling or unsecure, of course I would have landed right. I would have put it right down in the snow. We have a wonderful privilege of flying airplanes, but with that comes a tremendous responsibility. The very serious downside is that there is risk involved, but you can minimize all those risks worth the benefits.